Sometimes the quietest voice in the room can change everything. This story will prove it. Support the channel, subscribe, hit like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The courtroom was already crowded when Benjamin Cade walked in. He looked smaller than the room expected, smaller than the charges hanging over his head. 16 years old. Barely filling out the thrift store blazer that hung too loose across his shoulders, he moved with the quiet hesitation of someone more accustomed to being invisible and noticed. His shoes squeaked faintly against the polished floor, second-hand and scuffed, a detail that drew a ripple of smirks from the back rows. Everyone else in the chamber seemed to belong there. The prosecutor, with his crisp tie and perfect posture, the teachers and administrators seated with folded arms and thin smiles, the jury leaning forward with idle curiosity. They had seen defendants before, but never one this young, never one standing alone at the defense table with no lawyer by his side. The judge, Harold Peterson, adjusted his glasses and frowned down from the bench. His gavel rested within easy reach, his patience clearly not infinite. Case number 4823, he announced. The State versus Benjamin Cade. A hush settled. Benjamin sat at the defendant's table, his notebook closed neatly in front of him. He didn't shuffle nervously, didn't whisper to anyone, because there was no one to whisper to. Alone, he waited until the judge's eyes found him. "Mr. Cade," Judge Peterson said, his tone measured, "I do not see an attorney present. Where is your representation?" Benjamin stood, his voice softer than the silence. "I waived it, Your Honor." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A boy his age had no business standing here without counsel. The prosecutor, Daniel Brooks, allowed a thin, dismissive smile to play across his lips. To him, this was already a victory, already a lesson in futility. "You're representing yourself?" Brooks asked, his voice laced with amusement. "Yes, sir," Benjamin replied, and though his voice cracked slightly, he didn't look away. Judge Peterson's brow creased. "You understand the seriousness of these charges? This is not traffic court. You are accused of grand larceny, the theft of school property exceeding $10,000. This is not a matter to be taken lightly." Benjamin nodded once. "I understand, Your Honor. I don't need a lawyer. I only need the truth to be heard." The words drew another ripple through the audience, half laughter, half disbelief. A 16-year-old claiming he could stand toe-to-toe with seasoned prosecutors was absurd. Everyone thought so, except perhaps Benjamin himself. The bailiff called the first witness. Richard Holbrook, the school principal, stepped forward. A man in his 50s with polished shoes and a confident stride, he looked every bit the authority figure. Adjusting his tie, he raised his right hand, swore the oath, and took his seat at the witness stand. Prosecutor Brooks wasted no time. "Mr. Holbrook, please describe what happened the night of the theft." Holbrook leaned forward, projecting his voice with the clarity of a man used to being listened to. He described the missing cameras, laptops, and microphones. He spoke of the broken cabinet in the media lab, of the fingerprints recovered from the latch, fingerprints that matched Benjamin Cade. His testimony painted a clear picture, an inside job committed by a student with opportunity, access, and motive. The prosecutor nodded approvingly. "So, to be clear, Mr. Holbrook, the defendant's fingerprints were found on the very cabinet that was broken into?" "Yes," Holbrook said firmly. "And was there any sign of forced entry elsewhere?" "No. The thief knew what he was doing." Brooks turned to the jury, spreading his hands as if the matter were already closed. "Ladies and gentlemen, you see how straightforward this is." The gallery shifted with murmurs of agreement. Then it was Benjamin's turn. He rose slowly, walked toward the witness stand with a calmness that looked almost eerie for his age. Hands clasped behind his back, he stood in silence for a moment, just looking at the principal. "Mr. Holbrook," Benjamin began, his voice steady now, "how long have I been volunteering in the media lab?" Holbrook blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "Since your freshman year, I believe, 3 years. In that time, have I ever checked out equipment?" "Yes, often." Benjamin nodded. "So my fingerprints being on the equipment cabinet isn't unusual, is it?" A pause. Holbrook shifted in his chair. "No, I suppose not." The gallery stirred. The ripple of laughter that had mocked Benjamin earlier stilled into uneasy silence. The prosecutor's smile faltered just slightly. "And when was the last time I checked something out?" Benjamin asked. Holbrook hesitated, then said, "Last Tuesday." Benjamin turned toward the judge. "That was 2 days before the theft. My prints were already there." The silence grew heavier. Even the jurors leaned forward now, listening with renewed interest. Benjamin returned his gaze to the principal. His eyes, sharp behind the unassuming exterior, studied the man carefully. "Mr. Holbrook, can you tell the court where you were on the night of the theft?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Cade, that's irrelevant." Benjamin didn't flinch. "No, Your Honor, it's extremely relevant." A shift in tone made the room hold its breath. Holbrook stiffened slightly. "I was at home," he said. "Alone?" Benjamin asked. Holbrook's jaw tightened. "Yes. So no one else can confirm that?" "No." Benjamin paced slowly, each step deliberate. He didn't sound like a teenager grasping for cleverness. He sounded like someone asking questions he already knew the answers to. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. Even the judge noticed. Benjamin stopped, faced the principal again, and spoke quietly, almost gently. "Mr. Holbrook, do you remember the email you sent the night the equipment went missing?" The principal frowned. "What email?" Benjamin reached into a manila folder, pulled out a printed sheet and handed it to the bailiff. "This one." The judge examined it, then looked at Holbrook. "Did you send this email at 9:47 p.m. the night of the theft?" Holbrook leaned forward, squinting at the page. "Yes, I emailed the district about a budget transfer." Benjamin nodded. "You sent it from your office desktop?" "Yes." "From your school account?" "Yes." Benjamin tilted his head. "So you were at school that night?" A beat of silence. Holbrook's eyes narrowed. "I must have sent it remotely." "You said you were at home?" "I was." Benjamin's voice stayed calm, even soft. "But the system logs show that login came from the school's hardwired IP address, not remotely. That means someone was physically in the building." The words landed like stones. The gallery erupted in murmurs. The prosecutor rose quickly. "Objection. Mr. Cade is making assumptions he can't support." Benjamin raised a flash drive. "This contains the security logs from the district's server. I obtained them legally through a public records request." The judge, intrigued now, leaned forward. "I'll allow it." Benjamin walked to the projector station, connected the drive, and pulled up a timeline on the screen. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the evidence came alive in digital rows. "Here," Benjamin said, pointing. 9:47 p.m. district email sent. Logged in from IP address ending in 223. He clicked another tab. "This is the school's static IP. It ends in 223. He looked up. His voice carried no triumph, only certainty. "No student has access to that machine, only administrators." The room froze. Holbrook's complexion had paled visibly. Benjamin let the silence stretch, then said, "So, either someone broke into your office, used your login credentials, and emailed the district, or you were there. Which is it?" Holbrook's mouth opened, then closed again. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Holbrook, you're under oath." The principal's lips twitched. I must have forgotten. I did stop by the school." Benjamin didn't smile, didn't gloat. He only asked, "Why did you lie?" "I didn't lie," Holbrook said too quickly. "I just didn't think it mattered." Benjamin's voice remained steady, controlled. "But it does matter, because that's the exact time the security system glitched, when all the hallway cameras went down, the exact moment the equipment vanished." He turned to the judge. "I'm not saying Mr. Holbrook stole anything. I'm saying he was there. And if he could forget being at school that night, how many other things has he forgotten?" Gasps, murmurs. A weight of unease settled over the room. The prosecutor tried to regain control, but his words sounded less certain now. The judge leaned back in his chair, pen tapping slowly against the bench. And Benjamin Cade, 16 years old, standing alone, looked not like a boy out of his depth, but like someone just beginning a game no one else realized they were playing. The recess was short, barely 15 minutes, but when the court reconvened, the air felt different. Gone were the smirks and dismissive glances that had greeted Benjamin Cade when he first entered. Now there was a hum of unease, a subtle shift in the balance of power that no one wanted to admit out loud. A boy had just forced the principal of Roosevelt High to admit he lied under oath. It was not proof of innocence, not yet, but it was enough to rattle everyone who thought the trial would be a formality. Judge Harold Peterson struck his gavel once. "We will proceed." His voice carried a new note of caution, as though he was aware the ground under this case was not as solid as it had first appeared. He turned toward the prosecutor. "Mr. Brooks, call your next witness." Daniel Brooks cleared his throat. His earlier confidence had dulled, though he tried to mask it with the same crisp posture. "No further witnesses at this time, Your Honor. The state rests on Mr. Holbrook's testimony." Benjamin, still standing by his table, spoke before the judge could move on. "Your Honor, I request permission to recall Mr. Holbrook for further questions." The gallery stirred again. Judge Peterson narrowed his eyes but nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Cade, but stay within reason." Holbrook returned to the stand, his polished confidence visibly cracked. The lines around his mouth were tighter, his shoulders stiff, as if he was holding back the urge to glare at the boy who had cornered him minutes before. Benjamin approached slowly, his hands clasped behind his back in the same calm stance. His voice, though quiet, carried through the hushed room. "Mr. Holbrook, you testified earlier that you were home the night of the theft. Then you admitted you were at the school. Which statement is true?" Holbrook's jaw tightened. I was at the school briefly. I returned home afterward." "So your first statement under oath was false." "I misspoke." Benjamin let the word hang in the air before continuing. "You said you emailed the district about a budget transfer that night. Do you remember which computer you used?" "My office desktop," Holbrook replied carefully. Benjamin turned to the projector again, pulling up a highlighted log entry. "System records show your login at 9:47 p.m. from the school's hardwired IP address, the same moment the school's security cameras went offline. Can you explain that coincidence?" Holbrook shifted in his seat. "The cameras at Roosevelt are old. They go down from time to time." Benjamin's eyes narrowed slightly. "And the system happened to fail at the exact moment you logged in from your office?" The gallery whispered, tension thickening. Judge Peterson rapped his gavel once. "Order." Benjamin paused deliberately, then shifted topics. "Mr. Holbrook, do you remember sending an email to the district earlier that week about equipment requests?" "Yes," Holbrook answered quickly, relieved to move away from the night of the theft. Was I the student who regularly helped file those requests with you? Holbrook blinked, hesitated. Yes, you often assisted. Did I ever have access to your office computer? No. So, the only person who could have used that machine the night of the theft was you or another administrator with your login credentials, correct? Holbrook's lips pressed thin. Yes. Benjamin looked directly at the jury. So the evidence doesn't show that I was in the lab that night. It shows that Mr. Holbrook was in the building. The gallery murmured louder now. Prosecutor Brooks stood. Objection. The defendant is attempting to place blame without proof. But the judge shook his head slowly. The objection is noted but overruled. The witness has already admitted to being in the building. Continue, Mr. Cade. Benjamin nodded. His eyes didn't leave Holbrook. Mr. Holbrook, is there anyone who can verify that you returned home that evening after leaving the school? No, Holbrook admitted reluctantly. Benjamin stepped back, hands folded. No further questions at this time. The room buzzed as Holbrook stepped down. He looked less like the confident authority figure who had entered and more like a man carrying invisible weight. For the first time, the jurors' expressions shifted from dismissive certainty to unease. Benjamin returned to his table, flipping open his notebook. He scanned his scribbled notes, then looked toward the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to call my own witness. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have a witness? Yes. Benjamin's voice was calm but firm. Miss Teresa Lane. A ripple ran through the room as a woman in her mid-30s rose from the gallery. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her work ID badge still hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Clearly nervous, she clutched the strap of her bag as she walked toward the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat, glancing nervously at the judge before her eyes flicked to Benjamin. He approached gently, his voice quieter than usual. Miss Lane, could you tell the court what your position is at Roosevelt High? I'm the sound and lighting technician for the theater department, she answered. And on the night of the theft, what were you doing? She swallowed, her hands twisting in her lap. I was working late in the theater room, fixing the main stage console. It had been malfunctioning for weeks. Did you see anyone else in the building that night? Teresa hesitated. Yes. Benjamin's gaze sharpened slightly. Who did you see? Her voice lowered. Mr. Holbrook. He was walking toward the media lab. He looked like he was carrying something. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Did he see you? Benjamin asked. No, I stayed quiet. I assumed he was just checking on something. But when I heard about the theft the next day, she faltered, then looked down. I wondered if what I saw was connected. Benjamin nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Lane. No further questions. Prosecutor Brooks rose quickly, eager to dismantle the damage. Miss Lane, are you certain of what you saw? It was late, the building was dark. I know what I saw, Teresa interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. Brooks frowned, regrouped. You have no proof, no photographs, no one else to verify this? No, she admitted. So this could have been anyone. It was Mr. Holbrook, she said again, more firmly this time. Brooks sighed heavily, waving a hand as he sat. No further questions. Benjamin returned to his seat. The gallery was no longer indifferent. Students whispered to each other. Parents leaned forward, and even the local journalist in the corner scribbled notes furiously. Sierra, the girl with the red beanie seated near the back, leaned toward a fellow student and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. He's turning the whole case inside out. And he was. With each question, each quiet piece of evidence, Benjamin was shifting the trial from an open and shut case against him to something far more dangerous, for the people who thought no one would notice the cracks. The judge finally cleared his throat. "This court will adjourn for the day and reconvene tomorrow morning. Mr. Cade, prepare your remaining witnesses and evidence. Mr. Brooks, be ready to respond." The gavel struck. Benjamin closed his notebook. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. But the faintest flicker of something, resolve or perhaps anticipation, flashed in his eyes as he gathered his things. The first crack had appeared, and he was ready to make it wider. The courthouse emptied slowly, a current of whispers and low voices trailing through the halls. For most people, the case was now more than a student on trial. It was a spectacle, a question mark hanging over authority figures they once trusted. For Benjamin Cade, however, it wasn't over. It wasn't even close. He left through a side door, moving unnoticed while the crowd debated in the lobby. He didn't head home. Instead, he walked back toward Roosevelt High, the late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. His shoes scuffed the pavement in steady rhythm, but his mind moved faster. The trial had shifted. Teresa Lane's testimony put Principal Holbrook in the building that night, and Benjamin's questions had exposed his lies. But suspicion wasn't enough. Suspicion could unravel, could be dismissed as coincidence or bias. He needed proof, real proof, something undeniable. Roosevelt High stood quiet under the orange wash of the setting sun. The front office was locked, but Benjamin didn't need the office. He knew the school better than most adults ever had. He slipped around the side, past the chain-link fence that sagged near the theater entrance, and pushed open a door that rarely latched properly. Inside, the building smelled of dust and faint cleaning chemicals. His footsteps echoed as he walked down the corridor toward the old sound booth, a place most students didn't even know existed. It was tucked behind the auditorium, used once years ago but forgotten after new systems were installed. No one bothered with it anymore. That made it safe. Benjamin flicked on a flashlight and climbed the narrow steps. The booth greeted him with dust-coated panels, yellowed papers, and tangled cords. For most people, it was junk. For him, it was potential. He pulled open drawers one by one, coughing as dust swirled in the air. Old scripts, cracked binders, and frayed cables filled the first two. The third drawer stuck halfway, groaning against rust. He tugged harder until it jerked open. There, beneath a layer of curled paper programs, sat a small battered external drive. Its casing was scratched, its label faded. But Benjamin knew exactly what it was. Backup drives. Every sound technician knew they existed. Automatic saves of stage rehearsals, test runs, and ambient recordings. No one thought twice about them, but Benjamin did. He slipped the drive into his backpack and left quietly, heart steady but pulse quickening with possibility. At home, the drive whirred like an old engine trying to wake up after years of silence. Benjamin connected it to his laptop, waited as the files loaded one by one. Hundreds of them, folders labeled by date, most filled with routine recordings, music rehearsals, microphone tests, backstage chatter. He scrolled through, scanning names, timestamps, looking for one thing: the night of the theft. There, a folder marked 1107. Inside, a file named simply autorec_1107.wav. Benjamin clicked, at first static. He adjusted the levels, increased the gain, scrubbed through seconds of muffled silence. Then, voices, faint but distinct. He leaned closer. Holbrook's voice emerged first, steady, low, unmistakable. Just enough to make it look like an inside job. "Don't touch the cameras. I'll handle it." Benjamin froze. A second voice followed, sharper, anxious. He knew it instantly. Marcus O'Reilly, student body president, teacher's favorite, a boy Benjamin had shared quiet lunches with once or twice, though they'd never spoken much. Marcus sounded nervous now. But if someone finds out, they won't, Holbrook replied. It's all under control. The file ended with a click of silence. Benjamin sat back slowly. His chest rose and fell in quiet, measured breaths. The evidence was strong, stronger than anything he had expected to find. This wasn't rumor or coincidence. This was their voices, caught without their knowledge, planning everything. Holbrook's authority and Marcus's privilege tied together in one conspiracy, and he was their scapegoat. He checked the clock on his wall. 11:52 p.m. He had less than 9 hours before court resumed in the morning. Evidence was only a part of the equation. The other part was presentation. A teenager claiming innocence was easy to ignore. A teenager bringing undeniable proof, audio that captured the principal's voice and the student body president's fear, was different. It would change the courtroom. It would change everything. But Benjamin knew the danger. If he brought this file without context, without linking it to the larger picture, it could still be dismissed as coincidence or even fabrication. He needed to anchor it with facts, with records no one could dispute. He went back into the folders, searching for anything else recorded that night. There were short clips of stage hums, microphone checks, nothing useful. Only that one file mattered. Benjamin copied it to a clean flash drive and slid it into his backpack. He closed his laptop, then opened his notebook instead. Pages of scribbles, timelines, quotes, observations. He added one more line at the bottom of the page. Audio proof, Holbrook plus Marcus. Plan to stage theft. Do not rush. Present carefully. The pen hovered for a moment before he underlined the words, "Do not rush." He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The thought circled in his mind. What did they mean? Just enough to make it look like an inside job? Enough to frame him, yes, but why frame a student at all? Why stage a theft instead of just covering it up? It felt bigger than missing cameras and laptops. Still, that was a question for later. For now, he had something real, something undeniable. The night stretched on, silent except for the hum of his laptop cooling. Benjamin didn't sleep. He didn't even try. He rehearsed questions in his head, replayed the audio again and again, not to convince himself it was true, but to plan how to deliver it so no one else could deny it. By dawn, his eyes burned from fatigue, but his mind was sharper than ever. He packed his notebook, his flash drive, and walked out the door into the crisp morning air. At the courthouse steps, students gathered, teachers murmured, parents leaned into each other with questions they didn't dare speak too loudly. A local reporter balanced a notepad against her knee, glancing toward the entrance every few seconds. Word had spread. Today was no longer just a hearing about a student accused of theft. It was something bigger. Benjamin stepped past them all without pause. His tie was still crooked, his shoes still scuffed, but no one laughed this time. Their eyes followed him instead, uncertain, curious, waiting. Inside the courtroom, Judge Peterson adjusted his glasses, already sensing the weight of the day ahead. The bailiff called for order, and the gavel struck. Benjamin rose, standing taller than before, his notebook in one hand, his evidence ready in the other. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, calm, carrying more weight than a boy his age should have. "I have new evidence." The gallery leaned forward, breath caught. Judge Peterson's brows furrowed. "Was this evidence obtained legally?" "Yes," Benjamin replied. "The theater's sound system records automatically. The file was saved to a backup drive in a public access drawer. No passwords, no restrictions." The judge nodded slowly. Proceed. Benjamin placed the flash drive in the bailiff's hand, and within moments the courtroom lights dimmed and the speakers crackled to life. Static. Then, Holbrook's voice, "Just enough to make it look like an inside job. Don't touch the cameras. I'll handle it." Gasps erupted before the clip even ended. Marcus's voice followed. "But if someone finds out, they won't. It's all under control." Click. Silence. The room was no longer indifferent. The room was alive, charged, holding its breath for what came next. And Benjamin Cade, 16 years old, stood calmly at the center, holding the weight of truth in his hands. The recording still echoed in the courtroom long after it ended. Holbrook's voice, Marcus's panic, the unmistakable plotting, it lingered in the silence like smoke after a fire. For a moment, no one spoke. The judge's gavel tapped once, but even that sharp sound couldn't erase what everyone had just heard. "Order," Judge Peterson said firmly. But the gallery was alive now, parents whispering, students leaning forward, reporters scribbling furiously. For the first time since the trial began, all eyes weren't fixed on Benjamin Cade as the boy on trial. They were fixed on the men whose voices had just betrayed them. Prosecutor Daniel Brooks rose quickly, his voice strained. "Your Honor, this proves nothing beyond careless words. The context is unclear, the source questionable." Benjamin stood calmly. "The source is an automatic theater recording saved by the school's system. It was preserved on a backup drive. I accessed it in a public drawer. The file metadata shows the exact time and date. It hasn't been altered." Judge Peterson leaned forward. "Do you have that documentation?" "Yes, Your Honor." Benjamin handed over printed sheets, each with timestamps and system logs. The judge reviewed them slowly. When he looked up, his gaze was sharper, his tone heavier. "It appears legitimate." The gallery rippled with murmurs. Benjamin walked back to the podium, standing tall despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. "This isn't just about me, Your Honor. The voices we heard belong to Principal Richard Holbrook and Student Body President Marcus O'Reilly. They discussed staging a theft. They discussed making it look like an inside job." He held up another sheet of paper. "Here is the equipment checkout log. Marcus signed out cameras and microphones 2 weeks before the theft. Gear that was never returned." A gasp rolled through the room. Marcus, sitting in the gallery, froze. His usually confident posture crumbled, his face pale. He looked at Holbrook, but the principal didn't return his gaze. Holbrook sat stiffly, jaw clenched, hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Benjamin continued, his voice steady. "Marcus also had access to the back entrance, granted under a student leadership exception. That entrance bypasses most cameras. He didn't need to force entry. He was given the code." Prosecutor Brooks shifted uneasily, shuffling his papers as if hoping to find something that could undo the damage. But nothing came. The room wasn't listening to him anymore. It was listening to Benjamin. Judge Peterson turned to Holbrook. "Principal Holbrook, do you have any explanation for this?" Holbrook's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His silence stretched too long, and then Marcus broke. He stood suddenly, his voice high, trembling. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." All eyes turned to him. Marcus's words tumbled out in a rush. He said no one would notice, that no one cared about the quiet kids. He said Benjamin was perfect, an easy scapegoat. "I thought it would end with a report, a slap on the wrist, but then—" He trailed off, his voice cracking. Benjamin didn't move. He didn't smirk or flinch. He simply watched, his expression unreadable. Holbrook's eyes snapped toward Marcus, filled with fury. "Quiet," he hissed. But it was too late. The courtroom was buzzing with shock. The jury exchanged uneasy glances, The gallery erupted into whispers, and the judge's gavel struck again. "Order!" Benjamin stepped forward, voice calm against the chaos. "Your Honor, this case was never about proving I had access. Everyone knew I did. It was about whether I was guilty. This recording, this log, and this testimony prove I wasn't. It proves there was a plan to make me the scapegoat." Judge Peterson exhaled slowly. His eyes swept from Benjamin to Holbrook, then to Marcus, then back again. "This court will recess for 20 minutes. During this time, I will consult with the district attorney and review the evidence presented. Bailiff, see to it that Principal Holbrook and Mr. O'Reilly remain available for questioning." The gavel struck hard. Court in recess. But no one moved. The shock was too thick, the silence too sharp. Slowly, people began to rise, voices overlapping, fragments of disbelief filling the air. Marcus slumped back into his chair, face in his hands. Holbrook sat like stone, his fury radiating but his power gone. The prosecutor gathered his papers with shaken hands, knowing the case was slipping beyond his control. Benjamin returned quietly to his seat. His notebook lay closed before him, his hands folded on top. He didn't bask in the moment. He didn't celebrate. His breathing was steady, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Sierra slipped through the gallery during the recess, notebook pressed to her chest. She reached his side and whispered, "That was insane. You just cracked open the whole system." Benjamin looked at her, his voice even. "There's one more thing." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I don't think Holbrook staged the theft just to frame me," Benjamin said softly. "I think he was covering something bigger." Sierra stared at him. "How do you know?" "Because liars panic when they're caught. But Holbrook hasn't panicked. Not yet. He's calm, even now, like this isn't the worst of it." She studied his face, the sharpness in his eyes that made him seem older than 16. "What do you think he's hiding?" Benjamin glanced toward the doors where Holbrook had just been escorted out under watch. His jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." He rose quietly and slipped into the hallway. The Administrative Records Office stood across from the courtroom, cleared of staff during the trial. He sat at a terminal, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. Not hacking, just a forgotten guest account left open from years of volunteer hours. He searched emails, financial reports, budget transfers. Then one file caught his eye. Media Lab Renovation Grant, $25,000. Benjamin opened it. The details were vague, dates blurred, vendor names inconsistent. The grant money had been deposited, the documents signed, but no equipment had ever been purchased. The receipts were blank, the paper trail was hollow, and the approval signature? Not Holbrook, the assistant principal. Benjamin's stomach tightened as the pieces shifted into place. This wasn't just a theft, it was embezzlement. The missing equipment wasn't the real story. He was the scapegoat, the distraction, the easiest misdirection in the building. By the time recess ended, Benjamin had printed the files and returned to the courtroom. He approached the bench as the gavel struck to reconvene. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady though his heart pounded, "I request to amend the scope of this hearing to include potential financial misconduct connected to this case." The judge blinked, surprised. "That is a serious accusation, Mr. Cade." Benjamin handed over the documents. "So is framing a minor." The judge studied the pages, his frown deepening. Then he looked up, turning towards the district attorney, who had entered during the recess. "I suggest a formal investigation into Principal Holbrook and associated parties for possible embezzlement." Holbrook stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't be serious." His voice cracked, not with anger, but with panic. The judge didn't flinch. "Bailiff, please detain Mr. Holbrook and Mr. O'Reilly, pending further inquiry." The gallery erupted. No gasps this time, but applause. Hands clapped, voices rose, relief and shock mingling into one sound. Sierra clapped once, then caught Benjamin's eye. "Sorry," she whispered. "I couldn't help it." Benjamin almost smiled, the smallest flicker of acknowledgement, because for the first time the room wasn't just listening, it was believing. The sound of applause still hung in the air long after the gavel struck. The courtroom that had once laughed at Benjamin Cade now echoed with something entirely different. Belief. What had begun as a routine hearing for a troubled student accused of theft had transformed into a public reckoning. The bailiff escorted Principal Richard Holbrook and Marcus O'Reilly out in handcuffs, their faces pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. For a moment, Benjamin stayed seated. His hands rested flat on the table, his notebook still closed. The trial wasn't officially over. There would be investigations, paperwork, hearings beyond this one, but for him, the verdict had already been written. He had proven the truth. He had survived. When the room finally emptied, Benjamin stood, collected his belongings, and walked out quietly. No victory speeches, no gloating, just the slow, steady steps of someone carrying more weight than triumph alone. The next morning at Roosevelt High, the halls buzzed with energy. Students gathered in clusters, voices hushed but animated, as if the walls themselves carried the echoes of yesterday's revelations. Teachers whispered in doorways, their faces tight with uncertainty. Benjamin walked through it all like a shadow, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his notebook tucked inside. This time no one sneered. Heads turned. Some students nodded. Others simply moved aside, their expressions shifting with something close to respect. Even the front office, usually indifferent to him, felt different. The acting principal, Mrs. Reed, requested to see him. She was younger than Holbrook, her presence less intimidating but sharper in focus. She gestured for him to sit across from her desk. "Benjamin," she said softly, "what you uncovered yesterday was serious. The district will need time to recover. We'll be conducting a full audit." Benjamin nodded once, his face unreadable. "We'd also like to offer you something," Mrs. Reed continued, "a position on the Student Integrity Council, paid internship hours, and, when you graduate, a pathway toward mentorship in law if you choose it. You've shown skills most adults don't have." Benjamin blinked. "Why?" "Because people who see what others miss are rare," Mrs. Reed said, "and they're needed." He didn't answer right away. He thought of Holbrook's calm lies, Marcus's panicked confession, the weight of an entire courtroom shifting in his direction. Finally, he said, "I'll think about it." Mrs. Reed nodded, though disappointment flickered across her face. Benjamin left quietly, the offer trailing behind him like an echo. Later that afternoon, Benjamin found himself in the library. He sat at a corner table, away from the clusters of students whispering about him, the quiet hum of computers and the faint rustle of pages wrapped around him. He opened his notebook, but this time he didn't fill it with evidence or questions. He just stared at the blank page. Sierra appeared a few minutes later, sliding into the chair across from him. Her red beanie sat slightly askew, her sketchbook clutched against her chest. "No speech today?" she teased. Benjamin shook his head. "You still sketching everything?" he asked. She grinned. "It's how I make sense of the world." "You think it makes sense?" "No," she said with a laugh, "but it feels better when I turn it into art." He considered that, then muttered, "Maybe I should draw too." "You already do," she said, "just with facts instead of pencils." Benjamin glanced at his notebook filled with timelines, logs, and testimony. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't art in the traditional sense, but it was something that reshaped the world in its own way. Sierra slid her sketchbook across the table. A new page, her latest drawing. It wasn't just him at the podium anymore. It was the whole courtroom. Some faces laughing, others stunned, some changed forever. At the center, Benjamin, his posture steady, his gaze unshaken. "You changed the shape of that room," she said quietly. Benjamin studied the drawing for a long moment before whispering, "I wonder what it cost." Sierra's expression softened. The truth always costs something. 3 days later, the courthouse remained the talk of the town. Holbrook's arrest dominated headlines in the local paper, alongside mentions of a district-wide investigation into embezzlement. Marcus O'Reilly had vanished from Roosevelt's halls, his seat on the student council left conspicuously empty. Benjamin stood in the media lab, alone. The hum of computers filled the silence, the faint scent of dust and old cables clinging to the air. The rebuilt cabinet stood firm, a new lock glinting under the fluorescent lights. He touched the edge of the workbench, the place where he had first noticed the inconsistencies, the overlooked details. Back then, no one believed him. Now, they had no choice. He sat down, opened his notebook, and flipped past pages filled with the trial, notes, strategies, pieces of a puzzle that had led him here. On a fresh page, he wrote a single line: "Truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand." He underlined it once, then closed the notebook. The following week, Sierra found him again in the library. "They want you to speak at the district assembly," she said, settling into the chair across from him. Benjamin groaned. She laughed. "Don't worry. I told them you'd only go if they let you run the soundboard." A small smile cracked across his face. "I'd do it for that." They sat together in the quiet, the weight of recent days settling into something almost normal. "You ever think about how many kids out there are like you?" Sierra asked suddenly. Benjamin looked up. "What do you mean?" "The quiet ones, the observers, the ones who see something wrong but don't know if anyone would listen if they said it out loud." He thought about that. They shouldn't have to shout to be believed. "Exactly," Sierra said. "That's why your story matters." Benjamin didn't respond. He just looked down at his notebook, at the line he had written the night before. "Truth doesn't need to scream." The world outside the courthouse moved on quickly, but for Roosevelt High, for the students who had sat in that courtroom, for the teachers who had seen their principal exposed, things were different now. Authority no longer felt untouchable. Lies no longer felt unbreakable. And for Benjamin Cade, the boy everyone had underestimated, it was never about glory or victory. It was about standing still when the storm raged, letting the facts speak louder than the noise. The price of truth had been heavy: loneliness, suspicion, sleepless nights. But in the end, it was worth it. Because he had proven something greater than innocence. He had proven that even the quietest voice could deliver the loudest verdict. The story ends, but the conversation is just beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers.